Good morning. My name's Pete Saronis, and I am excited to be here on September 14th with my colleague and friend, Mark Gabriel. This is the Dots and Bridges Thought Leadership Consortium. I'm the founder and CEO of Dots and Bridges, where for the past 5 years, I've continued my passion for connecting dots, building bridges, and creating a few light bulb moments along the way. I am on a mission to educate, inform, and enlighten as to how technology affects humanity, how humanity influences culture, and frankly, how culture shapes humanity, and do that through stories, storytelling, and translation. I worked in the federal government for 25 years, kicking off my career in the Pentagon, straight out of Villanova University, go Wildcats, and finishing as a member of the Senior Executive Service. I served 4 administrations, 3 agencies, and was honored to be a 2-time cabinet-level chief technology officer, which I think is more of a connective tissue officer role, but both times at the United States Departments of Energy and Education, and what a ride it was. In addition, I get to serve as chairperson for the Smart Cities Utility Supercluster, which, as we'll find out today, addresses the next generation technologies, the value of smart infrastructure in a world that's digitally connected, and it promotes participation, collaboration, and that transparency so needed in a world today that's evolving each and every second that we're on this earth. We focus on energy, water, and waste management, and that again will be a wonderful topic with our guest today, Mr. Mark Gabriel. I just want to finish before we get into this with an idea for folks of you listening in to ponder and understand that the public and private sectors, we share a symbiotic relationship, one that's so necessary for efficient operations, for workforce development. We'll use terms like critical infrastructure today, the 16 sectors that are deemed most critical to our country. Think energy, water, transportation, dams, another topic that we'll be getting into today. But how we collaborate across those sectors, how we collaborate in the public, private, academic, and entrepreneurial environment. It's not about buying and selling technology. It's more about the seekers and solvers and the opportunities to advance or accelerate our nation's, economy and security. And again, Mark will be sharing some of that passion and his human spirit. And frankly, he'll emphasize, I think, a lot of what keeps him going, and that's his curiosity. So with that, Mark, that's my sucking a little bit of air out of the call. Welcome to the consortium. I don't read bios, but I'm going to give a little bit, and then I'm going to kick it back. I love that you're a dumb old utility guy, so that's who we're looking at right now. But he happens to also be the administrator and chief executive officer of the Western Area Power Administration. We'll get into what that is. 30 years in the electric industry, plus gas, oil, and water. Ridiculous pedigree that it is. 8 years at EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. Certified technology nerd, as he says. He's a published author. His book, Visions for a Sustainable Energy Future, it won the 2009 Indie Excellence Award for Environmental Writing. Please check it out. You can find it, I would imagine, on Amazon and other places. But you're going to see today and hear today a lot of what he talked about then that has become reality. He's a true visionary. He was appointed on April 13, 2013. He hails from Fordham University, Bachelor of Arts degree, fellow BA guy myself in political science, and then he's got his master's in administration management from St. Michael's College in Burlington, Vermont. So he's got this East Coast thing going on, even though he's out in the West Coast there. Mark, other than there's 15 bullets here I'm not going to go into. I think just as we storytell today, it is important to kind of highlight a few of those. But the one that strikes me is you're one of 30 CEOs on the Electricity Subsector Coordination Council for the North American Reliability Corporation, more than 2 decades of leadership across the electricity sector. Black & Veatch, again, we mentioned EPRI. You report directly to the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity Assistant Secretary. I can go on and on, but what did I leave out, or did I capture the essence of who Mark Gabriel is?
Well, I think you did, Pete, and thanks for having me participate. This industry is both my vocation and avocation. And your opening comments about, culture and technology and how those things are integrated really is kind of the core of my being. But here's something that you don't know that's not in that sheet. I actually started my career as a journalist. Was a newspaper reporter in New Jersey way back when. And what it taught me were a couple of things. First and foremost, if you can figure out what people are saying, you can learn an awful lot. And good journalists, the best ones you can think of are those that have really got that concept, not that who they're interviewing are, have all of the answers, but rather if you listen carefully enough, you could learn a tremendous amount. So that's kind of one of the things that's not on my bio, but it taught me a lot of really good lessons. It taught me, again, how to listen and how to then translate all these amazing things that go on out into the rest of the universe. And whether that was at EPRI, certainly my experience at the Western Area Power Administration, being able to translate the good works that are being done so that people can understand it and figure out how those are incorporated in their own lives is really the key to making these things happen, especially in a world that is, of course, now connected digitally as opposed to face-to-face. Translating all that's going on is one of the critical items that I have taken on myself as far as the energy and water industry in particular, because it's such a critical piece of our society.
Yeah, Mark, I want to jump into kind of the WAPA story and allow you to do exactly that. I think I have a phrase that I say, everybody has a little, I hope there's nobody ever named Joe Sixpack, but a Joe Sixpack in us, right? There's a lot to digest, and anybody who's read Mark's stuff online, I mean, he does such a good job of a picture this, or for example, think about energy and electricity. And when I think of WAPA and hydropower, that those kind of things come to mind where people might kind of get it, but we need them to get it. And I think that if we can tap into those opportunities through our conversations today to evoke folks to listen, stay curious, and then follow up, I think it would be awfully compelling. So, Mark, I'm going to tee you up with what's your favorite part about working at the WAPA, but more importantly, maybe a little bit of background on WAPA, what it is, and its incredible historical significance in our country.
Sure, thanks, Pete. Yeah, Western Area Power Administration was formed back in 1977 with the Department of Energy and basically took over the responsibility for what are now 57 dams in the United States. The dams are actually operated by the Bureau of Reclamation, the Army Corps of Engineers, and a group called the International Boundary and Waters Commission, interestingly enough, part of the Department of State. The bottom line is WAPA has two main jobs. The first thing is to sell the power that's created by the 57 dams that we are responsible for. You've heard of many of them. Hoover Dam, Glen Canyon Dam are just two of the big ones that most people think about. We also have the Falcon and Amistad dams down in Texas. We have a number of dams across Utah and Colorado and Wyoming, and of course all of the Missouri River. So think about those as the big generators, 10,000 megawatts of power. That's one part of our business. The second part is we have a transmission system, the big wires, 17,240 some odd miles of the transmission system, which links a service territory that now I'm going to say 1.4 million square miles. That's hard to envision. But think about the size of Paris to Moscow and Athens to Oslo. That's the size of our footprint. 15 states, going from Iowa to California, the Canadian border down to Mexico. We serve roughly 700 customers. And when I say that, those are municipal electricity utilities, cooperatives, investor-owned utilities, military bases. And they, in turn, put out the power again from the dams through transmission to roughly 40 million Americans who get some or part of their power from WAPA. And what's the best part about WAPA? That I think that was kind of at the core of your question, Pete.
Absolutely.
The best part is that we have a phenomenally dedicated workforce focused on the mission of resilience and reliability. And in today's world, grid resilience, the availability of power, Hydropower, of course, which is clean, green, and renewable. It's the ultimate renewable as far as I'm concerned. That value is more important than ever before, given what's happening out in the system, the changes that are going on in society, and quite frankly, the huge cultural revolution to where people are no longer one-way participants in getting electricity, but rather active participants in managing their own electricity, deciding that what type of generation that they want, right? And here's hydropower, which represents roughly 7% of the nation's generation, that is really the backbone of keeping the lights on across America.
Yeah, Mark, I'm sitting here taking notes. So again, those listening today and who watch this even at a later date, that's a incredible picture to paint. I mean, the metrics you talked about, customers and miles, 17,000 plus circuit miles of transmission. And again, generation, transmission, distribution. I always like to say when I'm driving along the highway in rural America, when I'm out there with the kids and family, it's like that. That's the transmission. Those are those big lines that allow us to turn the lights on. And, I glossed over, but to follow on to what you were saying, you've talked about dams, the dam sector. WAPA is involved in that sector, right? And that is one of the 16 that Department of Homeland Security deems most critical. And I want to say, as I'm looking at some of my notes here, that critical sector interdependencies, the water sector, energy sector, communications sector, food and agriculture, and transportation systems are things that you referenced in terms of you need electricity and power to turn things on, whether that's to support our military, to get our cars to drive, to allow satellites to work. And I think that's something that the role water can play in this, which you talk about in terms of it, the resilience is pretty amazing. And I'm not here to steal the thunder, but folks, when Mark Gabriel talks about the art of the possible, please check out the work that WAPA and its sister power marketing administrations, the Southeastern, Southwestern, and Bonneville Power entities provide to this country. So that's amazing. Mark, with all of this as a CEO and one that's out there talking about the mission of WAPA and your role, and you have a team. I mean, Jim Ball, spoke to him last week, the Chief Information Security Officer, amazing human being, and Dawn Roth-Lindell and Mike Montoya and David Tucker. Folks, these are people that Mark works with. And if you go out to visit WAPA, Mark's culture is unbelievable. It's truly why his organization is steadfast in providing the American public power. What are some of your challenges, though, Mark, when it comes to technology and staying current with where WAPA's mission wants to take when you have these roadmaps that are in many, many out years?
Well, there's a couple of things. WAPA is very unique in the federal government in that 94% of our funding comes from our customers. The 6% of appropriations that we get, we repay with interest. So what that really means is we've got to make sure we've got the right service levels and continue to push hard at being efficient. So, for example, one of the things that we instituted was continuous process improvement. Over the last 5 years, we've saved $114 million in the organization. I've also returned $1.3 billion to the Treasury. So it's a net benefit to the taxpayer. And obviously, anybody listening in the U.S. are going to be taxpayers. It's a very unique business model. That's the good news. The challenge is making sure that the 700 customers, again, remember utilities large and small, understand their important role in helping to fund what WAPA needs to do out into the future. So everything we do has got to both have a long-term vision, but also understand what the rate impact is. Because these are rate dollars that are coming from these communities. And in many cases, our low cost are the things that are keeping those communities alive. So when you, again, ask me, what do I like the best? When I go to Lusk, Wyoming, or I go to Sharonton, Wyoming, or I go to Trinity Public Utility District in way northern California, the fact that my rates are generally the lowest in the market makes me proud. It also is our challenge. We developed a 10-year strategic roadmap 2024 which laid out certain principles that we were going to follow. The first is business and operational excellence. That's the only way we can continue on our mission. By the same token, we need to have that out-year vision of what does the world look like. So in today's world, we market the power that's coming out of the dams, and it's done basically the way it's been done for the last 15 or 20 or 30 years. Out into the future, we have to think when coal goes offline, when unfortunately nuclear goes offline, which is a whole subtopic, Pete, we should talk about. But when those go offline, the value of that hydropower grows immensely. Just a week ago and then 3 weeks ago, the value of that hydropower is what allowed California to keep most of its grid on, as we were able to divert the electrons to make sure that California had power. Over time, as we lose baseload resources, the value of that water, and again, the value of the energy we generate, is going to go up. But how do we shift the business model, both in terms of technology, as well as in terms of the marketing of that power? Because many of us recognize, again, that's the value of being a Doug, a dumb old utility guy, that electrons are worth more at certain hours than they are at other hours. If I have to run the dam at a off-peak hour where there's not much demand, does that make sense in a world that is flush with wind or solar, or should we be changing how we manage that?
So, Mark, let me ask on a few notes as you wrote down. I love the words, you mentioned rates, which leads to regulation. You've used the word resilience. We talked about the consumer becoming, and we did this in our call last week or our show last week, where becoming a prosumer, providing energy to the grid. We put a solar panel on. People don't think of it, how the grid is becoming so intricate. And I know your role in leading and participating in the grid modernization initiatives being led out of the U.S. Department of Energy and Department of Homeland Security. You talk a lot about, there's a lot of moving parts. And I think that that's, as you articulate, part of that challenge of education and bringing people into the conversation. So this value of hydropower, I have a question for you, and just because it's so resident in our minds, I was reading about the term Blackstart recently, when there's something that happens and the power that doesn't have backup power. That's a term is that sort of what happened, where you have to come in, WAPA, and provide some support to what's happening in California, where when all else fails, having that reserve, or does water play a role in that?
And Blackstart is a little bit different from the role we played in California. In California, we literally diverted the power that would normally go to our customers. And made sure that it could flow to California, which is something that was really critical. Blackstart, however, is a little bit different. Think about it this way: when the grid goes down, and let's face it, this is the largest machine ever made in the world, this phenomenal collection of technologies.
It's a marvel.
It is a marvel. It is a marvel. That's why the Society of Engineers named the single invention of the century in the 20th century was the electric grid. But when it goes down, it needs to start up again, right? Think about your car sitting in the driveway. The engine just doesn't start. You have to turn a key, which it kicks off a battery, which moves the alternator, right? It's a building block. And think about the grid as a giant Lego set, right? You have to bring up power generation at the same time you bring up the load, the use on the system. So when the system goes dark, which it does, again, usually because of, it's usually weather and not terrorists, but it's usually weather. When the system goes dark, you have to start with that spark. And the spark in the West in particular is hydropower. Why? Because I don't really need electricity to start the dams. I can start the water flowing. I can get the turbines moving. Those in turn can light communities, cities, and the rest of the West as other generation comes up. So Blackstart is a critical component of the electric grid that we don't think about. And where we are, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just I mean, I had my, Professor Mark was needed for me after reading last night about, wait a minute, I hear about resilience and I hear about diversion. And being able to divert power, and we talk about renewables. And you know me, Mark, I'm this is a passion of mine to help explain and articulate my own way as a storyteller at times. But you know, we preach resilience in our country, and it's not until, as we're seeing even right now in the Gulf and the fires, that when bad things happen, when physical damage is inflicted or upon or our critical infrastructure, that's when the world, humanity, sizes, oh my gosh, I have no power. I can't drive my car. I'm not breathing clean air. That without power, things stop. I mean, to be blunt, people die in many cases. And I just think that's an important point. And in hearing you explain that, you know, there are so many levels of backup and resiliency. And when I was reading about Blackstart, I was like, wow, there's actually a term for that. But it makes me feel pretty good as a citizen. But yes, the network of networks, you know, needs to improve. And maybe that's a nice little segue into my next question is, what are you most excited about? I was out there, a year and a half ago with Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Pat Hoffman, and we talked about, you know, smart cities, and we talked about next generation infrastructure. When you look at how technology underpins so much of the future, well, is there something or a project or some reference that gets you excited about how technology is going to enable a lot of this next generation infrastructure for a future state grid?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that sounds really ethereal to people, right? Way up into the sky.
Right.
The reality is, as you said, whether it's the prosumers, whether it's people adding intelligence, the Nest thermostat, for example, solar panels, batteries, all of those things are edge of grid technologies. What we haven't done is we've got the core grid technologies, right, which is traditional generation. We've got edge of grid technologies, which is things, and I don't want to say the one product's name because she'll start talking to me here in my house. But we
stay
have,
agnostic.
I'm staying agnostic, or we have Nest thermostats, or we have electric vehicles. So we've got these two great masses, right? We've got the massive generation, transmission, and distribution on the right side, and we've got all these edge of grid technologies on the other. Bringing those two things together to manage a system is where I think I know the future is going. And can we use artificial intelligence to manage those, not thousands of points of light, but literally millions or billions of points of light together? And the reason this is important is both from the physics of keeping the lights on, and as I've said to others and you before, you know, physics beats philosophy every single day. But it's also critical for us as we think about this to make sure that there aren't huge social inequities created. Because it's very challenging in a country where the average family of four makes $54,000 a year to impact that population with the cost of people at the edge of the grid who can afford technology, right? So we have to figure out what is the right balance and how do we manage the system. So it's physics on one side. If you go to any one of my 5 dispatch centers, you'll see the men and women working 24/7, 365 with all the big screens like out of a sci-fi movie, right? Trying to control all of these things. And yet we've got this huge mass of uncaptured value in the edge of grid technologies that should and could be pulled into the center so that everybody benefits. Because at the risk of waxing too philosophical here, Pete, the reality is electricity has become a right and a critical societal component.
Yes.
And the level of fairness has got to be thought of, right? The lower income families in this country, in fact, the mid-income families in this country pay a larger proportion of their household income on energy and water than the wealthier families. And we've got to figure out how do we take advantage of the technology and at the same time keep the soft side of this, the social side in people's minds.
Yeah, you know, Mark, you're getting me to my neurons fire here a bit. And again, it's this societal value of technology underpinning. And I go back, you know, the infrastructure, and I go back to, and I appreciate what you're saying. And you know, that's what I love about these non-scripted chats. It's like you're getting me to think and to try to be enlightened, if you will. and the societal value of technology. We hear this all the time. Mike Montoya, your incredible CIO, Don Roth-Lindell, who I've spoke to. We always know technology is not the problem, but you mentioned the word convergence, I believe, and edge of grid, and how do we bring it together? And that's the challenging part, because that involves the human as well as the tech. And, you know, we like to blame good old ones and zeros, bits and bytes, when sometimes it's, do we have the right people at the table? So, you know, your physics beats philosophy is something I'll be tweeting out at some point, but that really spoke to me. And then your uncaptured value. I like to think of, in a world that's just laden with data as the new oil, and this opportunity to create actionable intelligence or applied intelligence with some of the places you just mentioned about how you're capturing a lot of that, making sense of it. And as I like to say, helping individuals, the consumer customer, why do I care? That's amazing. And I hope folks understand that incredible point you were just making. Okay. Mark, what's different about working at WAPA than any other place you have worked?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I always say it's like working at any large utility with a kind and gentle overlay of the federal government.
Kind and gentle. That's cool.
Kind and gentle. Well, I like to be generous here.
Yes.
There are certain boundary conditions or lanes that make it a little more of a challenge. You know, most utility executives and organizations my size report to a board of directors if they're an investor-owned, the co-op board if they're a co-op model, the city council or electricity board if they're municipal. I have 435 people in Washington who think they're my bosses, U.S. Congress, because we have to have that kind of interface. So, you know, on one hand, there is great value to that because it allows us, in the case of the Western Area Power Administration, I'm not trying to make a profit. I'm trying to keep the lights on. You know, I'm really focused on delivering great value. On the other hand, you know, sometimes because we are complex, we have an insanely complex financial model. As I said, 94% of our $1.3 billion budget comes directly from our customers. The small bit that I get, 80 some odd $1 million a year out of our appropriations, we repay with interest. But within that, there's all the what we call colors of money. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have, because the complexity of the financial model doesn't always line up really well with running a utility, and that makes it unique. On the other hand, I have to say that this has by far been my favorite job in my career, in the sense that we do great things. I have phenomenal people. One of our lines as we think about our value statements is serve like your lights depend on it. And that's really how we look at the world. And selfishly, I've had an opportunity to influence national policy, to be a part of putting back the island of Puerto Rico, certainly the U.S. Virgin Islands. We had crews down there for days, putting the transmission grid back up. And so it's a wonderful place with, like every place, it's got its own peccadillos, shall we say.
Well, you know, no, and again, having been there a couple of times, and again, I was so honored to come out last year, but to watch the people and the culture and the folks between my talk and when you weren't even in the room, I'm just saying, for anybody watching, there's no reason for me to blow anything up about Mark Gabriel, but he is a phenomenal leader, and folks want to be led by people like Mark Gabriel, but it is a great place. So Mark, let me ask you this, just a quick follow on. The fact that you're out there, I like to think of our national labs as those incredible marvels and treasures themselves. You're one of 4 utilities in our country with a ridiculously important role. How do you, and how often, especially now in the pandemic, got to ask it, how are you staying engaged with the wonderful Beltway and the politicians? Because you're talking about, while you're a government entity, right, you're also a utility. And you mentioned, you know, the role on the electricity subsector councils and stuff, but having a voice in Washington, how often are you, or how's this pandemic affected your ability to stay engaged with this Washington, D.C. community?
Yeah, it certainly made it a challenge, Pete. In my time up until pandemic, I was approaching 500 hill visits, not to mention,
A
going,
year?
no, over the
Okay.
course of about six and a half
Okay.
years.
Okay. Okay.
But that's still, if you do the math, that's an
That's
awful lot of visits
a third of the
every
year.
month.
Yep.
It's a third of the year back and forth, and not just on the Hill, but certainly, meeting with congressional staffers, DOD, DOE, our partners at the Department of Interior, Bureau of Land Management, you name it. This pandemic has changed that dynamic. We're doing a lot more like you and I on WebExes, and it's more challenging on one hand. On the other hand, it has forced me and the rest of my team to really be proactive online, to be proactive on phone calls. Stop sending emails, because at the end of the day, we all get too many emails. Give it some context. I mean, just this morning, I swore in 3 new employees at WAPA. We did it all virtually. And that's, so I'm trying to encourage that kind of communications. And I'm really lucky. I have 3 tremendous people in my Washington, D.C., in the sort of the Beltway office. And those, Shelley Scott, Kathy Tyre, and Deion Thompson, who lead the office out there. And they've been working hard. So, for example, every year I would do half a dozen what we call WAPA 101s or Utility 101s face-to-face. Well, now they've stepped up and they're doing them online.
That's
So
great.
it's just changing the technology. And I do want to give a plug to our staff at WAPA. We put 1,200 people out on telework in 4.5 days.
Jeez.
Right.
That's amazing.
We took the 300 or almost 400 employees that we have, in the men and women, I always say, in the wires, keeping the poles strung and all that stuff. We had to change their work practices in less than 2 weeks so that they could only work alone. They had to wear masks. They could take government vehicles home for the first time. That literally went all the way to the secretary and the Congress, because we had to get the permissions for that. Changing how we pair people up. Amazing. Our dispatchers, we reconfigured our dispatch centers in a period of 2 weeks. We put a whole crew, 2 crews of dispatchers out basically in isolation. We sequestered them so we could be prepared just in case we had to do that broadly because of this horrible virus. The organization has reacted amazingly, and I couldn't be any prouder of what these folks have done. I mean, it's really a testament to technology, right? I'm sitting from my home at 9,000 feet in Colorado. I jokingly say the Galactic WAPA headquarters, and I'm able to connect with our folks.
Yes.
It's a testament to the technology.
No, and again, that's where I think anyone who will watch this and be eager to, grab it. Ooh, he said such and such, and here's the future. And, the technology's not the problem. I'm hearing that from a lot of folks who talk about this, not next or new normal. It is what it is. I got 4 kids right now in a Google Classroom, and I got one that's, go in the building, believe it or not. And it's just, we're waiting for the pivot quickly because the internet connection went down. And I think that, Mark, again, what I love hearing when we talk is about being on the ready and being constantly, and it's not to mean, you're running 100 miles an hour all of the time, but that as technology evolves and as might impact the mission of WAPA itself. So let me put on your prognosticator hat here for a minute, because you mentioned stuff you're excited about, some of the challenges. I like to think and pose to my guests sometimes, a year from now, or 3 years or 5 years, what's the world going to look like in terms of, in your view, or in the country, if you will, the modernization of our grid, right? It is complex and it works. And we hear that resilience matters and renewables, but do you see maybe, what is a challenge you're feeling like right now you're championing and you're thinking there's some progress, even if it's small, for folks to get excited about?
Well, there's a couple things. I don't think we're ever going to go back to normal. And I'm sorry to say that, but I had an aha moment several weeks ago at a meeting where folks were talking about the novel normal.
Okay.
right? I've heard people say we may never shake hands again, right? So that's on the human side. That's a challenge. On the other hand, what we are learning through this pandemic is how to function with technology in a way we could have never imagined before. And so that allows us to think differently. When I talked about AI and machine learning in terms of these edge of grid value, to bring that back in, it won't be uncomfortable anymore when there's a snowstorm and your kids, guess what? They don't get a snow day. They're going to, those days are over, right? Those
Yeah,
snow days
yeah.
are over. I do stress on one side over this issue that we are marching very quickly down a path in what I call the Twitter-centric world in terms of the electric grid and electric generation, at taking out too much capacity off the system. That was witnessed candidly in California. We've known about this for 4 or 5 years. The fact of the matter is, California told us last September that we were going to be 2,300 megawatts short there and did nothing really about that. And then on top of it, you layer on the horrible wildfires, you layer on cloudy days, all of those things. And it points to where I think the shining future is. We have got to figure out how to manage this system differently. We've done this as a utility industry for years. We've done it as a society. Think about this. You and I are both old enough to remember when you used to plug your laptop, which was about this thick, right? You plugged it into a telephone wire, and you heard that famous sound, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, right? You heard that. And what happened? It overwhelmed the telephone system, right? It would cut on and off. Your fax machine wouldn't work, all of those things. Why? Because the fundamental infrastructure was not robust enough to support the changes society demanded.
Yes.
We're at that same point right now. So in the next year, it's going to be challenging. The next 3 years, my belief is that as we invest in technology and people understand, again, the one bright light of the pandemic, we're seeing the value of these technologies, that we get to the point where we're using the right type of computing power to take advantage of what the system looks like. Now, within 5 years, I actually think we really need to move hard on large-scale storage. Putting a Tesla Powerwall in your garage is great for you, but quite frankly, back to my comment about social justice, it puts too much pressure on the lower-income families in America. We need large-scale battery storage. We need the small modular reactor. We need nuclear to remain here. It is so critical. We need to make sure that we assure the value of hydropower. And if you think about hydro, only 3% of the 90,000 dams in the United States are powered. Think about how preciously small that is. Now, should some dams come out? Absolutely. There are those that are no longer have a value. But should we power other dams? I don't see how we get ahead without doing that to balance out what we all want, right? Which is clean, renewable, carbon-free energy. We have to get there.
Yeah, Mark, first of all, thank you for the 135. I was saying, hey, man, give us a vision for a year out, and I actually have, you've quoted so many of my favorite quotes from and check out Mark's articles at Public Utilities Fortnightly, both in 2020 and 2018. The one called or titled Value of Hydropower and a Dynamic Energy Frontier is amazing. You talk about storage, and I know that could be a whole separate discussion and advanced metering, but you made a comment or a quote. I assume it's your quote. I like the quote, but it says, utilities must demonstrate a willingness to take a risk, employing the very technologies that represent the greatest threats. They should change their thinking from time of use to time of purchase, and from conservation to all-you-can-eat consumption during times of oversupply. And I took away from what you just said. When I read that, I was like, yes, are we using, and again, this isn't a knock at anyone, but I think of how do we take advantage of dams more effectively and efficiently if they're underutilized? And that's what I hear you speaking to. And when I read it, the dam sector specific plan for the future, it's like, we've got an opportunity with hydropower to change the world. Did I capture that?
You did, and there's kind of 3 pieces in that article, and I've been very public about this. I always call them three unorthodox thoughts about the future. The first is what I say is the kilowatt hour is dead. And by that I mean the kilowatt hour is a really valuable engineering measure, right? Because that's how we measure the electrons flowing through and how much are used. But in the old financial model, the kilowatt hour is one that is all the weight of the cost of the system is put on the kilowatt hour. So what happens when fewer kilowatt hours are used? Again, I'm not debating whether you should use more or less. That's not the question. I don't think the business model is robust enough anymore to charge by kilowatt hour. My analogy is your cell phone. You don't pay. What do you pay per minute, Pete, for your cell phone?
I don't.
You don't.
I unlimited. Yeah.
It's unlimited, right? So we have to figure out what that model is, because otherwise we just keep layering cost on to the people who can't afford the kilowatt hour. It's just not. There's a equity issue here. The second component is when you're generating too much electricity, which we do, because as you add solar, as you add things during the day, we have to figure out what do you do with that, right? It's not that we can suddenly put it all into storage. If we could, that would be wonderful, but that's not going to work for a while. So why don't we set up a dynamic model where, let's say from 10 to 3 in California, you super cool buildings, you incent manufacturing to use all the electricity they possibly can because there's a surplus. I know the current model is to try to ship it somewhere else, but we really don't have that transmission superhighway yet. And as we get to storage, if you think about storage, it matters. It will no longer matter when you use it. It matters when you buy it. In your car, you are basically using a time of purchase rate when you buy gasoline,
yes.
Right? And it doesn't matter if that car sits in your driveway or you drive it across country, right? So electricity in the storage mode should be exactly the same way. When you buy it matters, not when you use it. And those three things combined really change the dynamic out into the future. So now, tying that back to the whole question of dams. In the middle of the day in California, should my dams be running, other than for environmental purposes? We have to do that for fish and everything else. But should we be running, or should we be holding back that power, that water, till 5:30 at night when the peak happens? By the way, everywhere in the country that I've studied, 5 to 9 o'clock at night is the electric peak. So, yeah, there's a little one in the morning. So we need to really rethink about that. Not just flowing the dams at 24/7 to meet some requirement, rather figuring out what is the right time to do that, and how do you get compensated for that?
Yeah, well, you just summarized the article eloquently. I just remember thinking, gosh, I have this whole sheet here of like Mark quotes, but I'm like, that one was, I think, the essence of what you're saying, Mark. Utilities, there's investor owned, there's co-ops, there's the PMAs. I mean, it's a network of networks. And when you flip your switch on, or as I look at my Ecobee thermostat, you want the power and the control and the ability to have those creature comforts, but you do need to understand how the electrons work, the privacy of your data. And I think, Mark, you have, as we get ready to move into some fun questions, not that these haven't been fun, something for us to think about. And the homework is, when you watch this, folks, go look up some of the buzzword bingo that we came up with. Understand what a megawatt is versus a kilowatt. Understand what Blackstart is. Look up resilience and grid, and absolutely hit energy.gov, not to mention WAPA.gov. So, all right, Professor, these are the quick fire questions I like to lead into. And your last question I'm giving you in advance will be what you want to leave with the audience for the day as sort of their light bulb moments. But here's the first one. This is going to be really a hardball for you. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Wow, that's a challenge. I always wanted, even though I'm not musical at all, I always wanted to set the music scores for movies.
Oh.
Because sometimes I hear a score and I'm thinking, boy, that would be great in such and such a scene. Now that's completely off the off the charts.
I
But
love it. That's
it was just one of those things. I've always thought in life, had I done things better, number one, had I known how to really read music and play music and do all those things, I don't have that skill set. But sometimes I hear that music and think, boy, that would be great in such and such a movie.
I love it. And that's a great answer. And I got to tell you, I have moments where it's not the instrument, even though I'm like, why wasn't I ever in a band? But I have those moments where I'm like, God, I wish I could have been that guy in the band in college that played at
You
the
just want the
bar.
groupies, Pete. Come on, you just wanted the groupies.
Well, maybe that had something to do with it. Okay. Number two, what profession would you not like to do?
Anything to do with medicine.
Okay.
Even though my one of my grandfathers was an ear, nose, and throat specialist, my other grandfather was a dentist. I don't watch doctor shows on TV, so that's not it's not in my never would I want to do that.
Hey, you're coming from the son of a retired general surgeon who still can't get his blood drawn without freaking out. But gosh, another number two, I can relate to that. Mark, who are whether you know them or not, who are your heroes in life?
Well, and I know it's corny, but both of my parents, my mother escaped Nazi Germany through a phenomenal story, which we can talk about sometime over a glass of wine. So that was amazing. And my father, who spent most of his career as a professor and social worker, but he helped the first waves of Cuban migration come over right after Castro took over. Wow. And the two things do tie together in a fascinating story. But those two folks my parents were always my heroes in that regard. And then I've been also really blessed in my career to have some phenomenal mentors, mostly informal, people who gave me opportunities. The first CEO that hired me in a utility, a guy named Tom Webb. And I always tell the story because it meant so much, and it still means so much to me. My fourth day at the job, brand new to the electric utility business. I go out for a cup of coffee. I come back, and there's Tom Webb, the CEO, sitting in my cubicle.
Whoa.
And he says, "Hi, I'm Tom Webb." I said, "Well, of course I know who you are." He goes, "I just want to tell you how happy I am that you came to join Central Vermont Public Service." Jeez. So to this day, I used to do it in person. Now I'm doing it on a video. When we hire new people, I either go to their office or go online and make sure we spend at least a half hour to an hour together so they can understand me and the organization. And you can tell it's 30 years ago, and it's had such an amazing thing. And I also always thank another mentor, Clark Gellings, who you may or may not know. Clark was at EPRI. He hired me, took a chance on me. And I always will thank him. He's written dozens of books on this industry for really giving me an opportunity at EPRI to learn everything I have about the industry, whether it's nuclear power, the energy efficiency. And Clark just saw something in me and gave me that chance.
Well, Tom and Clark, that's amazing. Obviously that resonates with me, Mark. And again, we need more Mark Gabriels in this world. What do you value most in your friends and colleagues? Think, their character and attribute that you find infectious and something you're attracted to.
Well, I'm always attracted to people who have no fear in telling me when I'm wrong. And I think that's really important because it's easy for those of us shy extroverts to get over the top. And I always tell people, just because I say something confidently doesn't mean that I'm right. So that's the second attribute. I want people who have their own ideas and who really add to the equation in those discussions. And on a friend's level, I feel exactly the same way. I have lots of hobbies, which some people don't particularly care for. So my friend pool is everything from one of my best friends, who is a retired fireman from San Jose, all the way up to one of the greatest PhDs I know, who invented the color copier at Kodak. So I just love the cross-fertilization of folks from different backgrounds, different cultures, really understanding, helping me understand better.
Yeah.
Helping me understand me better.
Yeah. No, your humility is so infectious, Mark, and I love it. I appreciate you. Since you opened it up, come on, top 2 or 3 hobbies. I wouldn't even have that one planned. You mentioned it.
Top
What are
2 or
they?
3 hobbies. And again, this is not politically correct. I'm a hunter. I
Okay.
love to big game hunt. I love to bow
Yep.
hunt, um, fly fishing, anything outdoors,
Got it.
hiking. And those are like big things for me. And again, they're not necessarily overly popular with some folks, but for me, just being out in nature, being able to experience, being able to spend, as I did the last 5 days, sitting quietly at 10,000 feet in the Rockies, really just it takes me to another place.
Oh, I love it. There's the impact of being outside of this Northeast where we've grown up, the impact of the West. Okay, last question before your parting shot. What would you tell, whether it's 21 or 20, I like to think right out of college, what would you give a 21-year-old Mark Gabriel advice about based on where you are today?
Just say yes. And that was something I learned from my mom. Say yes to the hard things. Take the risk. If there's a job that you see in your company or your school that nobody wants to do to get their hands dirty, say yes. Take it. Because you can't do any worse than the situation already is, right?
Yeah.
But you learn so much in that process. I've been fortunate in my career that I've been a journalist. I ran a small publishing company. I've been in energy now for 30 years. And I've gotten there's a great richness in the opportunities. So find things that nobody else wants to do and do them to the best of your ability. And by the way, bring good people with you. Make
Amen.
sure that you're with the best.
Yeah.
Hire people who are better, smarter than you are, and you'll do it and let them do their own thing, right? Don't get in the people's way.
Wonderful. I mean, that's not cliche at all, and yet that's as simple as it gets. Okay, my friend, listen, obviously I'm going to give a thank you here in a minute, but major little Pete Saronis version of shout out, but leave a parting shot, a tweetable with the audience. We're excited to have had you, obviously, and what would you like them to take away from today about you and your journey?
Well, again, I think it's take the opportunities that are out there, but also, I am passionate about the electric utility business and electricity and water and the value to society. Can you imagine this horrible pandemic with the lights out? I mean, on top of everything else. And it's why, quite frankly, I got a little ticked off and wrote all the major news channels and ended up doing a video, which you can find on LinkedIn and YouTube, about the critical electric utility workers, keeping the lights on.
Oh, yeah. Right? I've seen this.
They kept talking, no disrespect, the doctors, the nurses, all the frontline, our electric workers, electric utility folks, sitting in dispatch centers 24/7, 365, are the front lines of this pandemic. Because can you imagine not having the lights on or the electricity for your ventilators? It's not possible. And the last thing I'll leave you with, one of my mentors always said, electrons follow the laws of physics, electricity follows the laws of politics. One set we can revoke and change and modify, the other we can't. So let's be careful when we make changes on the political side of electricity to understand what does that mean on the electron, the physics side of electricity.
Drop the mic. Amazing finish there. But yes, 100% agree on that. Again, folks, today was hopefully a moment for you to hear from one of our nation's thought leaders, change agents, clearly storyteller. Mark, thank you. Dots and Bridges, thanks you. I can't wait to promote this and get it out to even more folks who can get to know a little bit about your walkabout, the incredible culture that you have out at the WAPA, the concept of humanity being a piece of everything you do and the influence of those who've come before you. So Great to see you. Great to hear from you, my friend. We will talk again soon. And thanks again for all that you do.
Thanks for the opportunity, Pete. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, buddy.